This is a story about a small coastal city on the northern Syrian shore in the last warm summer before the fires came. A city called Ugarit, in a year we would number 1187 before the Common Era. It is a story of ordinary people, a weigher of silver who counts the shekels of 4 kingdoms in his head, a dyer's daughter who carries purple in the creases of her hands, a scribe's son learning 7 scripts at once, a diviner who reads the future in a clay liver, and the quiet, patient work by which they meet one another in the narrow streets between the sea and the Acropolis. Let us begin before the sun. Picture a lane barely 3 paces wide, rising by slow degrees toward the temple of Baal on the high ground. The stones of the walls are ashlar, set neatly, and between the courses of stone there are courses of timber, dark as old bread. Above the walls, the flat roofs make a second city, a quiet upper country of reed mats, drying figs, and sleeping bodies laid out where the night air is cooler than the rooms below. At this hour the sky is the color of a pale shell. A single star still hangs over the tower of Baal, which rises so high above the houses that sailors far out in the bay use its beacon to steer by. The beacon has gone out now, only its stone remains, and the smell of cold ash drifting downwind. Listen, a donkey shifts its weight somewhere behind a gate. A child turns in her sleep on a roof. From 2 courtyards away, a woman has begun to grind barley, the slow, patient rasp of stone on stone, the oldest sound in any Ugaritian morning. In another house, a little further up the slope, a second quern joins her, and then a third, until the whole quarter seems to breathe in the same rhythm. Push, draw, the grain becoming flour beneath careful hands. Beneath every one of these houses, a family tomb waits in the dark. The dead are near. They sleep under the floors of the living, and the living remember them in small ways throughout the day. A cup of wine poured into a stone pipe, a word spoken softly at a threshold. Let us walk up the lane toward the Acropolis, where a man has already risen and is lacing his sandals by the light of a single oil lamp. His name is Yakaru. He is a weigher of metals in the service of the palace, and he has a long walk before him this morning, down to the harbor and back before the day grows too hot. Let us follow him out into the cool, pale street. Yakaru steps out of his doorway with the quiet care of a man who has done this 1,000 times. He is perhaps 40 years old, lean in the way that walking men are lean, with gray coming in at his temples and hands that have been made careful by the weighing of small things. On a cord around his neck hangs a flat leather pouch. Inside the pouch lie 8 polished stones, each a weight in a different system, each carved with a small mark only he and his kind fully understand. He does not trust the pouch to a servant. It rides against his chest when he walks, rising and falling with his breath. The street smells of damp stone and the faint sourness of last night's cooking fires. He turns down the lane toward the south gate, passing the closed shutters of houses where families are still stirring. A cat slips ahead of him and vanishes into a doorway. Somewhere above, a woman calls softly to a child. Somewhere below, in the dark, under a neighbor's floor, a grandmother lies in her chamber tomb, and a libation pipe catches the first light of day. The gate guards know him and nod him through without a word. Beyond the wall, the road opens out. It is 10 kilometers to the harbor. The path runs first through the fields that belong to the city, then bends toward the coast along the folded country that drops gently westward to the sea. The light is growing now, the color shifting from shell to milk to the faintest apricot along the ridge behind him. On either side of the road, olive trees stand in their crooked rows, their leaves silver on the underside when the breeze turns them. The olives this year are small and few. The rains did not come when they were needed. Yakaru notes this as he walks, the way a weigher notes everything without alarm, simply registering the fact. He passes a field where the stubble of a barley crop stands brown and short. A boy is gleaning in it with a basket. The boy straightens, sees Yakaru, and lifts one hand. Yakaru lifts his in return. They do not speak. The road carries him on. After an hour, the land tilts. He smells the sea before he sees it. Salt, and beneath the salt a deeper, older smell that every person born near this coast knows in their sleep. The smell of the dye pits, the crushed shells of the murex, the decade of work piled into middens at the harbor's edge. It is not a pleasant smell. It is simply the smell of wealth. The purple that goes out in bales from Minet el-Beidha dresses the trim of kings as far away as Hatti and the palaces of the Nile. By the time the sun has lifted above the eastern ridge, he is walking down into the white harbor. The name is honest. The low cliffs around the bay are pale, the sand is pale, and the shells heaped in their long middens glow whitish in the morning. Ships lie at anchor. He can count them from the slope, 4, 6, 9, fewer than in the old years, but still a forest of masts. He has business at a warehouse near the shore, where a consignment of tin has come in from far away and must be weighed before it travels up to the city. He finds the warehouse. He weighs the tin. He marks his tablet. He accepts a cup of watered wine from the harbor agent, who is a man he has known for 20 years, and they speak of nothing in particular, of a cousin's wedding, of the price of almonds, of a ship that was lost last winter near Tyre, and whose grain was recovered and returned by the honest king of that city. All of this is said in the calm tone of men who have seen much and are not inclined to hurry. Then Yakaru takes his leave and begins the walk back. The return is always slower. The sun is higher now, and the road climbs. He keeps to the shaded side where he can, and he thinks as walking men think of small things. He thinks of the weight of the pouch against his chest. He thinks of his daughter Pitta, who is grinding barley at this hour, and of his son Nikmepa, who has gone down to the harbor by a different road to help a merchant uncle with the loading of a ship. He thinks of his wife, who is dead these 4 years and lies beneath the floor of the front room, and of the cup of wine he poured to her yesterday evening through the stone pipe set into the threshold. About halfway home, at a place where the road bends around a low outcrop, there is a stone. It is nothing remarkable, a waist-high block of weathered limestone that someone long ago set upright by the verge. Travelers rest against it. Yakaru has leaned on this stone 1,000 times. Today he stops and sets his hand flat upon its warm surface and simply stands there a moment, breathing. A kestrel comes over the ridge, slow, hanging on the air. It holds itself perfectly still above the field, wings shivering, watching something in the dry grass. Yakaru watches it. The bird does not stoop. After a long moment, it slides sideways, gathers itself, and is gone over the next rise. He does not know why he is standing here. There is no reason to stop. The day is warming, and the pouch is heavy, and the walk is not yet done. And yet something in him has paused. the way a cup pauses in the hand before it is set down. He feels, without quite thinking it, that the road he is walking has been walked many times by many men, and will be walked for only a little while longer. He does not say this to himself. He would not know how. He only feels the warm stone under his palm and the quietness of the country around him and the smallness of his own shadow on the path. Then he lifts his hand from the stone and goes on. By the time he passes back through the south gate, the sun is high and the market is beginning to wake. He turns toward home, his pouch still riding against his chest, his feet finding the familiar lane. Somewhere ahead, the rasp of a grinding stone is still going. It has been going since before he left. The sound Yakaru is walking toward, that slow, patient rasp of stone on stone, belongs to his daughter-in-law, Pitta. She has been at it since the first gray light. By the time he comes through the door of the courtyard, she has been kneeling at the quern for the better part of 3 hours, and the pile of coarse flour in the wooden bowl at her knee is perhaps 2/3 of what the household will need today. Picture her there. She is young, 21 perhaps, though no one keeps count the way we do, and she has the strong, slightly rounded shoulders of a woman who grinds grain every morning of her life. Her hair is tied back with a strip of dyed linen. Her knees rest on a folded mat. In front of her, the lower stone of the quern sits slightly dished from years of wear, and the upper stone, a loaf-shaped piece of basalt worn smooth on its working face, moves back and forth under her hands in a rhythm that is older than the city, older than the language she speaks, older than any god whose name she knows. The rhythm is this: a forward push with the shoulders, a trailing return, a gathering of spilled grain with the edge of the palm, a fresh handful fed into the slot at the top of the stone. Forward, return, gather, feed. Forward, return, gather, feed. A child could learn the motion in an afternoon. A woman's whole life is spent inside it. Pitta is not alone. Her daughter, a small girl of perhaps 5 years, sits cross-legged near the quern with a smaller stone and a small heap of barley, imitating her mother with great seriousness. The child's stone is no bigger than her own 2 hands and does not grind so much as crush. The barley under it is already half flour, half grit. She has been at it since the adults began, and she has not yet tired of it. Yakaru sets his pouch down on the wooden bench by the door and stands for a moment in the cool of the courtyard, listening. The rasping has a sound inside it that can only be heard when you have walked for an hour on a quiet road, a faint musical overtone, a breath in the grain. He does not speak to Pitta. She glances up, nods, and keeps working. They have known each other long enough that the nod is a whole conversation. In the next room, behind a curtain of undyed wool, the household's weights lie in their cedar box. Yakaru goes to them now. This is the part of the morning he has been walking toward. He is a weigher by trade, not a grand metrologist of the palace, but a man hired by smaller merchants to check a scale, arbitrate a disputed payment, certify a cargo for a short coastal journey. His tools fit into a box the size of 2 stacked loaves. Inside, on a bed of combed fleece, lie the weights themselves, small polished stones and cast bronze lumps of varying shapes, each one incised with a tiny mark on its underside. A duck for the Syrian standard, a crescent for the Hittite, a plain scratch for the Mesopotamian, a double scratch for Carchemish. He has worked with all 4 all his life, and he does not find it strange that a single merchant's chest might require him to shift between all four in the course of a single morning's reckoning. He lifts a small bronze piece, a shekel's weight in the Ugarit standard, 9 4/10 grams if you were counting in a way he would not, and sets it in his palm. It is cool. It is familiar. The duck mark has been worn shallow by years of his own thumb passing over it as he checks the incising. He has taught his son Nikmepa the feel of each piece, and Nikmepa in turn has taught his own son the names of the marks, though the boy is still too young to be trusted with the box. 3 generations of weighers in a single small cedar box that can be carried in one hand. Yakaru closes the box and sets it on the bench. He does not need it this morning. He only wanted to see that the pieces had not shifted in the night. From the courtyard, the rasp of the quern continues, steady as breath. Pitta has begun to sing, very quietly, not a song so much as a murmur of syllables on 2 pitches, the kind of thing grinding women have always hummed to keep the rhythm. The little girl is humming along, slightly off the beat, not realizing she is doing it. Yakaru stands in the doorway and watches them. He thinks, and this is a thought that does not quite reach words, that a city is not its walls, or its palaces, or its temples. A city is this: a woman kneeling at a stone before the sun is fully up, turning hard kernels into the flour that will feed her children by evening. A small girl imitating her mother, an old man holding a cool bronze shekel in his palm and feeling the wear of his own thumb in the metal. The grand things, the purple tribute to the Hittites, the ships in the Luca lands, the letters going out to Pharaoh, all of that rests on this, on the rasp of a stone, on the patience of hands, on the unthought inheritance of a gesture. He steps into the courtyard and sits on the low bench by the oven. Pitta does not pause. The quern keeps speaking. Above the roofline, a thin column of smoke rises from a neighbor's courtyard and is bent gently sideways by a breeze from the sea. The morning smells of burning olive wood and wet grain and the faint, far-off salt of the harbor still caught in Yakaru's own clothes. Across the courtyard, a curtain moves aside. Nikmepa, Yakaru's son, emerges from the upper stair with his eyes still heavy, scratching his jaw. He nods to his father, bends to kiss the top of his daughter's head, and takes a pinch of the coarse flour between his fingers to test its fineness. Pitta looks up at him. Something quiet passes between them, a glance that has in it the whole shape of a marriage, unspoken and unnamed. And then he goes to the water jar in the corner to wash his hands and face for the day ahead. Let us follow Nikmepa now, while the morning is still cool enough to walk without strain. He leaves the courtyard not long after washing, pausing only to take a small round of yesterday's bread from the basket by the door. His errand is not urgent, but it is not nothing either. His younger daughter, not Pitta's child, but the smaller one, still a toddler, has been waking in the night with a cough that has a rattle behind it, and Tamar, his wife, has asked him to stop at the house of the Khan on the way to the palace district. A small thing, perhaps nothing. But Tamar's mother died of a rattling cough when Tamar was a girl, and some fears do not answer to reason. They answer only to having been addressed. The diviner's house sits on a narrow lane that bends twice between the Acropolis slope and the better residences of the north. To reach it, Nikmepa passes under a lintel of cedar that has gone silver gray with weather and ducks slightly. The door is low, as the old doors are. Inside, the room is dim and smells of dry herbs and of something fainter, like the inside of a clay jar that has held wine for many years. The diviner is an old man named Ibiranu. He is sitting cross-legged on a reed mat with a sheep's liver model of baked clay in his lap, running his thumb along its fissures. Not for Nikmepa, for himself, or for practice, or for a client who has not yet arrived. He looks up when Nikmepa enters, and his face softens into recognition. The two men have known each other since Nikmepa was a boy. Ibiranu gestures to the cushion opposite him and sets the clay liver aside on a low shelf where it joins a small congregation of other such objects, some clay, one of pale ivory, one bronze, each inscribed along its edges with tight cuneiform incantations, a library written on the shape of an organ. Nikmepa sits. He describes the cough. Ibiranu listens without interrupting, his hands folded in his lap. When Nikmepa is finished, the old man nods slowly and does not speak for a long moment. There is no theater in this silence. He is thinking about the child. He has known the child. He held her when she was newly born, as he has held many of the children on this street. Then Ibiranu rises with the careful economy of an aging body that has learned not to waste its movements and goes to a wooden box by the far wall. From it he takes a small clay tablet, roughly the size of a man's palm, and a pinch of something crushed and dark from a stoppered jar, dried leaves, and something else, a resin perhaps. He wraps the pinch in a scrap of linen and ties it with thread. The tablet he sets on the mat between them. This tablet, he explains, though Nikmepa has seen such tablets all his life, is an incantation against the cough of the night and against whatever envious eye might be looking in through the window of a sleeping child. He names the evil eye in its several forms as he has been taught to name them, the way one lists the weathers, the eye of the envious neighbor, the eye of the hungry traveler, the eye of the woman who has lost her own. Nikmepa listens, not because he needs the list, but because the listing itself is part of the medicine, the act of addressing the trouble out loud, of refusing to pretend it is not there. The old man tells him to place the tablet beneath the child's sleeping mat and to steep the pinch of herbs in warm water with a little honey and to give it to the child before sleep for 3 nights. If the cough has not eased by the 4th night, come again. Nikmepa asks quietly whether he should also bring a lamb to Baal's temple. Ibiranu looks at him a long moment and answers with care. A lamb is always welcome at the temple, he says, but a lamb is for thanksgiving, not for fear. Wait until the child is well, then bring the lamb. Nikmepa takes the tablet and the small linen packet. He presses a silver piece, less than a shekel, something like a tenth, into the old man's palm. Ibiranu accepts it without looking at it, which is the courtesy of this exchange. The coin will be weighed later, in privacy, against whatever the day brings. At the door, Nikmepa turns. The old man is already back on his mat, lifting the clay liver again, his thumb finding the worn places along its fissures. The sunlight from the high window falls across his shoulder and catches the pale surface of the ivory model on the shelf, which is a little luminous in that light, as though it held its own small portion of the morning. Nikmepa ducks again beneath the silver-gray cedar lintel and steps back into the lane, the tablet warm against his palm from the old man's house. Somewhere up the slope, a rooster speaks belatedly to a sun that has long since risen. The fig tree in the courtyard of Pitta's house is older than the house itself. Her husband's grandfather planted it, or perhaps his grandfather's grandfather. The story shifts depending on who tells it, and no one seems to mind the shifting. What is certain is that the tree was there first. The walls of the courtyard were built around it, accommodating its trunk with a gentle curve of ashlar stone, and the flat roof above was cut back to let the upper branches rise into open air. By evening, the tree's shadow fills the whole small space. The day's heat has gone out of the stones, though they still give back a faint warmth if a hand is pressed against them. A low bench runs along the north wall, cut from a single piece of pale limestone, polished smooth by 4 generations of sitting. Pitta sits there now, her back against the wall, her hands loose in her lap. She has washed the flour from her wrists and changed into a lighter garment for the evening. Beside her sits Yakaru, who has come up from the lower city through the cooling lanes, carrying in his hand a small loaf she baked at midday and which he has been eating slowly as he walked. Neither of them speaks. This is not a silence of awkwardness, but of a long habit between two people who have shared a hearth for years. Pitta is the wife of his son Nikmepa, and the two of them have been sitting together in this courtyard since she first came to this household as a bride, and he has long since come to regard her as a daughter. The air is the color of honey held up to a window. A swift crosses the square of sky above the tree and is gone. From somewhere 2 courtyards down, the thin sound of a cooking fire can be heard, the crackle of dry brush catching, the light knock of a clay pot being set upon stones. A woman calls a child's name, and the child answers, and the matter between them is settled without further words. Yakaru finishes the last of the bread and brushes the crumbs from his palm onto the ground, where a small brown bird arrives almost immediately to take them. He watches the bird without comment. Pitta watches Yakaru. She has been watching him in small ways since he arrived at her door. She has noted the new stiffness in his shoulders, the way he sat down more carefully than a man of his age should need to sit. She has seen him tired many times. He works long days and his eyes have been tired for years. But this is a different tiredness, one that has settled in his jaw rather than his eyes. And Pitta, who has buried 2 children beneath the floor of this very house and knows what various weights look like when they are carried across a body, recognizes the shape of it. She does not ask. The asking, if it comes, will come later, or not at all. For now, she sets her hand lightly on the bench between them, not touching him, only placing her palm there, as one places a small lamp on a shelf where it may be useful if needed. Yakaru looks at her hand. He looks at the fig tree. He takes in a breath, slowly, and lets it out. Whatever he was going to say, he does not say. What he does instead is reach over and cover her hand with his own, briefly, and then withdraw it and return his gaze to the darkening leaves above them. A cat walks along the top of the courtyard wall with the unhurried purpose of cats at that hour. It pauses, considers the 2 humans below, and continues on its way. The sky above the tree has gone from honey to the paler blue that comes just before dusk, the blue that contains the memory of blue more than blue itself. From the roof of the house, Pitta's youngest, a boy of perhaps 10, calls down to ask whether he should bring the sleeping mats up tonight. She calls back that yes, he should. The night will be warm enough. The boy's feet cross the roof above them with the soft pattering of a creature that weighs very little and moves often. The fig tree's first fruit of the season hangs somewhere in the upper branches. Pitta can see the small green shapes against the dimming sky. They will not be ripe for weeks yet. She finds this thought steadying, as she always has. There will be figs. The tree has known drought years and wet years, and the year the Hittite tribute was doubled, and the year her eldest daughter was married, and it has produced figs in all of them, each summer a little later or a little earlier, each summer generous or thin, but always figs. Yakaru's breath has slowed. His eyes are still open, but they have softened. He is looking at nothing in particular, which is what a person does when the day has finally released him. The lamp in the main room is being lit by someone Pitta cannot see. The yellow light falls through the doorway into the courtyard in a single warm rectangle, and the two of them sit inside the edge of it, not speaking, while the city around them prepares for another night. Let us leave Pitta's courtyard now and move south and west across the city toward the harbor road where the smell changes. It is not an unkind smell to those who have known it all their lives, but it is unmistakable, a sharp, briny, rotten sweet note that rides the sea breeze and settles on clothes and hair and the inside of the nose. This is the smell of the murex. It does not belong to the city proper. The dye works are kept at Minet el-Beidha for exactly this reason. But the master dyer Ugarit keeps a house inside the walls, near the southern gate, where his family lives away from the stench, and where today, which is a rest day, the 14th of the month, his household is quiet. Ugarit himself is asleep on the roof. He came in very late last night from the harbor, where a batch of glands had finished its 10-day cooking and needed to be drawn off and tested in the evening light, and he has earned this sleep. His wife, Bunana, is in the courtyard below, sitting on a low stool with a length of undyed wool across her lap. She is not working it, only holding it. The rest day forbids the kind of labor that has a deadline. It permits the kind that has none. Her daughter, a girl of perhaps 14 named Abishai, is grinding pigment in a small stone mortar, not murex, which is the household's living, but a little pot of ochre for a neighbor who wants her door painted. Abishai grinds slowly and without urgency. The rasp of the pestle is the only insistent sound in the courtyard, and even it pauses often when she stops to look at something. A sparrow on the wall, her own fingernail, the shape of a cloud above the doorway. Bunana is thinking about the tribute. 500 shekels of purple wool go to the Hittite court each year, and the family's standing in the city depends on delivering its share. But this year the Hittites have asked for the tribute early, and there is a letter somewhere in the palace about it, and Ugarit has been at the harbor more than at home for 3 weeks now. She does not resent this. She resents only that the rest day is half gone already, and he is asleep through it. She will let him sleep. She always does. A neighbor's child comes to the doorway, holding a small clay cup and looking hopeful. Abishai gets up, takes the cup into the kitchen, returns with it filled with a little oil and a pinch of salt. The child thanks her and runs off. This is how the rest day moves here. Small errands permitted, large labors deferred, the household breathing at half pace. Bunana thinks of the dyes themselves, as she sometimes does when there is nothing to do but think. She remembers the first time her husband showed her the color changing in the sun, the pale, unpromising liquid set out in a shallow pan at Minet el-Beidha, and the way it darkened over the course of an afternoon, green at first, then blue, then the deep red-purple that is called argaman. He had been proud, and she had been young enough to be astonished. She is older now and less astonished, but she still finds the color beautiful when she sees it on a finished cloth. It is the color of something secret, the color a snail makes when it is afraid, transformed by sun and salt into the color of kings. She hears Abdi Yarik move on the roof above, a sigh, a shifting of weight, the sound of a man turning over without waking. He will sleep another hour yet. She is glad. Abishai has finished the ochre. She sets the mortar down, wipes her hands on a rag, and wanders toward the kitchen to see whether there is bread left from morning. The courtyard for a moment holds only Bunana and the wool in her lap and the high soft cooing of a dove somewhere in the eaves. She thinks, without particular sadness, that there have been fewer ships this season. Her husband has said so. The harbor agents speak of shortages, not of dye, but of the wool to dye, of the ships to carry it, of the markets that used to receive it. She sets the thought down gently, as she sets everything down on a rest day, and lets her hands smooth the wool in her lap for no reason at all. Across the city, in a quieter quarter where the streets narrow and the houses press close, another household is gathering at a cistern for water. The cistern stands in a small open place where three narrow streets meet, a rough circle of paving stones worn smooth by generations of feet, and at its center a stone-rimmed mouth leading down into the cool dark where the winter rains are kept. A low wall surrounds it, waist-high, built of the same ashlar that builds everything in this city, fitted close and packed with rubble. A wooden beam has been set across the opening, and from the beam hangs a rope, and at the end of the rope a clay jar blackened by years of dipping. 3 women and a girl have come for water in the late morning, and a 4th woman arrives as they are drawing. Her name is Talia. She is perhaps 40, with the strong forearms of a woman who has carried water all her life, and she greets the others by name as she sets down her jar. There is Milkaya, who is older than Talia, and walks with a slight list from a hip that is never quite healed. There is Anani, younger, with a baby bound to her chest in a length of undyed linen. And there is the girl, Anani's niece, perhaps 8 years old, sent to help, who watches the rope and the jar with a seriousness that belongs to children given their first grown task. The drawing is slow. The jar goes down, strikes water with a soft, hollow note, fills, and is hauled up hand over hand. Water spills on the stones. The stones darken. The girl is allowed to pour from the big jar into her aunt's smaller one, and she does it with both hands, and held breath, and only a little runs down the side. While they work, they speak, not urgently, the speaking of women who have drawn water together for years and have nothing new to say and say it anyway. Milkaya's daughter-in-law is with child again. Anani's husband has come back from a short journey up the coast and brought a small fish wrapped in leaves, which is a kindness. Talia's mother, who is very old, has been dreaming of her own mother, which Talia takes as a sign that the old woman will not be with them much longer. The women receive this without exclaiming. They nod. Milkaya says that her own mother dreamed the same dreams in her last month, and that it was a gentle going, as such goings sometimes are. Then Anani says quietly, the thing that all of them have been carrying and none is yet named. She says that her husband, who came back from up the coast, saw smoke on the northern horizon one evening. Not close. Not a fire anyone needed to run from, but smoke where there had not been smoke before. He had asked in the village where he stopped, and the villagers themselves were uncertain what it meant. Perhaps only a field being cleared, perhaps nothing. Nobody knew. The women stand for a moment with their hands on the rope and the rim. The girl looks from face to face, understanding that something is being said without knowing what. Milkaya shifts her weight off the bad hip. Talia pulls the jar up another arm's length. Then Anani says, with a small shrug that is not dismissal but something older, that her husband also said the village was full that night, people sharing bread, a wedding the next day, and that the smoke, whatever it was far away. They go back to the drawing. The rope complains softly in the beam's groove. The girl is given the rope again and told she is doing well. This is how such news moves in such a time, not in proclamations, not in the shouted announcements of heralds. It moves in the pause between one sentence and another at a cistern. It moves in the slight shift of a woman's shoulders. It moves and is set down, and the water goes on being drawn, because the water must be drawn, because the household must be fed, because the baby bound to Anani's chest will want to nurse again soon, and Anani's throat will be dry. They finish. The jars are full. Milkaya settles hers on a folded cloth on her head. Talia swings hers to her hip. Anani takes the smaller one because of the baby, and the girl carries the littlest of all with immense dignity. They part at the cistern, each turning down a different narrow street, calling soft farewells. The cistern is quiet again. The beam creaks once as the rope swings. A pigeon lands on the wall, considers the wet stones, and walks along the rim with small, precise steps. The water below is dark and still. The news has been spoken aloud. It has entered 4 more minds and will enter more as the day goes on, and each mind will set it down in its own way, and none will know what to make of it. That is the nature of witnessing in a time that has not yet named itself. The women walk home with full jars. The sun climbs. And in a different quarter of the city a merchant is preparing to walk to the market, and his daughter has a question she has been saving to ask him on the way. Baal, the merchant, lives in the north quarter in one of the jumbled large houses where a mansion leans against a modest home and both share a wall with a weaver's shop. He is not one of the great ship owners, not Yabninu, not Urtanu, but his name is known on the quay, and his warehouse by the harbor holds small lots of tin and cumin and Cypriot copper, and 2 cedar chests of Mycenaean cups wrapped in straw. This morning he is going to the market not to sell, but to buy a particular kind of dried fish his wife prefers, and to let his daughter Anatu walk beside him and look at whatever she wishes to look at. Anatu is 9. She has been saving her question for 3 days. They leave the house and enter the radio-concentric tangle of streets, narrow in some places to the width of a man's shoulders, widening without warning into small open spaces where a tree has been allowed to live. Baal walks slowly for her. He points out, without naming, the house of the scribe's family who copied a tablet for him last month, and the doorway of a woman whose father he had known as a boy. The city, for him, is a weaving of such small acknowledgments. Anatu watches his hand rather than the doorways. When they reach the market square, she has still not asked. The square is not large. Its boundary is loose. A potter's stall here, a dealer in oils there, a woman with a low cloth spread and small heaps of sumac and coriander and dried sage glowing in their separate mounds like colored sand, trampled organic debris underfoot, crushed leaves, a date stone, a scrap of rush matting gives the ground a soft brown uniformity. At the square's center stands the stela of the market god. Pida has been taught to call him Reshef, lord of the market, though she knows he is also, in other places, the lord of plague. The stone is worn where hands have touched it for generations. A smear of oil at its base has gone dark and fragrant. Itobal stops at the stela, as is proper, and touches its warm face briefly. Anatu touches it too, reaching up. Then they move to the fish dealer. The dealer is an older man with pale eyes, Egyptian on one side of his family and something farther north on the other. His dried Nile fish lie in neat rows on a reed mat, stiff and silver, and smelling faintly of salt and of the long river they came from. He and Itobal speak in Akkadian, the trade language, of weights and of the Tyrian ship that had not come this month. Anatu understands a little. She watches the man's hands weigh out a portion on a small balance and then wrap it in a palm leaf. It is on the walk back, the fish under Itobal's arm, the square behind them, that Anatu asks her question. She asks it looking at the ground. In the Ugaritic they speak at home. She asks why the gods do not simply give them rain. Itobal does not answer at once. He has been asked this in different forms by more adult people in recent months than he would have believed possible. He has heard it from his own brother. He has heard it in the careful, deflected way merchants speak from a Cypriot pilot over wine. He has never heard it from a child, and he is not sure if the question is different in a child's mouth or exactly the same. He tells her, finally, that he does not know. He tells her that even the priests do not entirely know. He tells her that Baal is said to die each year and return, and that perhaps the world is in one of the longer waiting seasons, and that the job of people is to keep the household and the city and the gods fed until he comes back. He says this without false certainty, and Anatu, who has a good ear for when her father is guessing, accepts it as the true answer it is. They pass the small fountain by the weaver's corner. A dog is drinking there. Anatu watches it. It is there, at the fountain, that Itobal sees the messenger, a man he half knows, in travel clothes, hurrying toward the royal quarter with a leather wallet of tablets under his arm. The man does not see Itobal. He is moving with the particular speed of someone who has been on a ship recently and has not yet stopped moving. Itobal watches him turn a corner and vanish. He does not know what is in the wallet. He never will. He knows only that he has seen for a moment a man carrying letters, and that the man's face had been the face of someone delivering news he did not want to deliver. He shifts the fish under his arm. He takes Anatu's hand. They walk home the long way, past the weaver, past a door where cats are sleeping in a patch of sun. The square falls behind them. The stela of Reshef stands in its place, warm in the light, waiting for the next hand. On the same afternoon, down the road at Minet el-Beidha, Nikmepa is standing at the end of the long jetty with nothing in his hands. This is unusual for him. A wearer's hands almost always hold something: a pan, a stone, a stylus, a cord. Today he has come down from the city alone, on a small matter of checking a shipment of tin that turns out not to have arrived, and he has found himself with an hour of unexpected emptiness before the walk back. He has used the hour to walk out along the stone jetty to its farthest point, past the moored fishing boats, past the last of the warehouses, out to where the water on both sides is deep and the wind comes off the sea without anything to soften it. He is a small man, tidy in his dress, with the careful posture of someone who has spent a lifetime bending over weights and not wanting to disturb them. His hair, what remains of it, is going gray at the temples. The sun is warm on his shoulders. The wind is cooler than it would have been a week ago. Something in the sea's smell has shifted. Less of the summer's thick green weight, more of the clean salt that belongs to autumn. He looks north. The coast curves away in a long, pale line. Somewhere up that coast, weeks of sailing away, lies the kingdom of the Hittites. Somewhere out to the west, beyond the horizon, lies Alashia. Somewhere to the south lies Egypt. Nikmepa does not know the details of what passes between these places. He knows only what a careful man in his position comes to know, that the tin is late this season, and that the firms that used to send 3 ships now send 2. And that the merchants have begun speaking with a particular kind of quietness about their routes. A gull lands on a bollard near him. It considers him, finds him uninteresting, and lifts off again. He thinks about his wife, who is at home weighing figs. He thinks about his daughter, who is married now to a scribe's son and lives 2 streets away. He thinks about his grandson, who last week learned to say his name. He thinks about the tomb beneath his house, where his father and his father's mother and his own infant son, who did not live past his 2nd summer, are sealed in the small dark chamber, and where he himself will be laid when his time comes. The thought is not morbid. It is simply the shape of his world. His dead are neighbors. He pours oil down to them on the 1st of each month. He expects when his turn comes to be poured for in the same way. What he cannot quite shape today is the question of whether the pouring will continue. He has begun in the last year to notice things he does not know how to weigh. The merchants who used to come in spring and did not come this spring. The grain measures that have been adjusted downward without announcement. The particular way the king's scribes walk now through the streets, quickly, with their wallets held close. Yesterday a boy in his household asked him whether it was true that in Imar the wells had gone dry, and Nikmepa had said he did not know which was the truth, and the boy had accepted it, and Nikmepa had thought for a long time afterward about what it meant that a child had asked him such a question at all. He does not have a word for what he is feeling. He is a man of weights, and the thing he is trying to weigh has no standard. The old kings stretch behind him in an unbroken line, each one buried under the royal palace, each one fed. The temple of Baal stands above the city. The Baal tower's beacon will be lit tonight, as it has been lit every night since before his grandfather's grandfather. These things, to Nikmepa, have always had the weight of stone. Today, for the first time, he has the small strange sense that he is holding a stone and finding it lighter than it ought to be. He stands with this for a while. He does not force it into words. He has learned over a long career that some things will not resolve into a number, and that the proper response is to let them sit on the pan until they settle. After a time he turns, He walks back down the jetty. He nods to a man mending a net. He does not mention to the man the thought he has just been having because he does not have it clearly enough to say. He will walk back to the city in the cooler part of the afternoon. He will eat the evening meal with his wife. He will sleep above his father's bones. And tomorrow he will weigh figs and tin and the small daily things, and he will do them well. The road home lies ahead of him, climbing gently, pale in the sun. The evening comes slowly in the season of hunger. There is a long, pale hour when the sun has gone from the courtyards, but not yet from the roofs, when the swallows cut low over the streets and the stone walls give back the warmth they have held all day. In this hour, Pitta sets the low table in the courtyard of the weigher's house. She sets out a shallow bowl of barley bread, smaller than last month's loaves and darker, and a dish of olives and a little oil and a cup of wine cut with water. There is no meat. There has not been meat at the evening meal for many weeks. The dried fish from the Nile has grown dear, and she has been careful with what remains. Nikmepa has come in from the harbor road with the dust of the walk still on his feet. He has washed them at the stone basin by the door. He sits now on the bench along the courtyard wall, and Pitta sits across from him, and the two of them eat slowly, as people eat who have been eating less for a long time and have learned to make a little food occupy the whole space of a meal. They speak of small things. A cousin's daughter is to be married in the month of the new wine, if there is new wine. A neighbor's donkey is lame. The weigher mentions, without naming him, the boy at the harbor who asked the question about the ships, and Pitta nods and does not press. She has known her husband a long time. She knows when a thing is sitting on him that he has not yet finished turning over. Across the small courtyard, a bread oven is still warm from the afternoon. A lamp is not yet lit. The light of the sky is still enough. From 2 courtyards down, the sound of another family's cooking fire comes softly. The crack of a twig, a woman's voice calling a child, and the sound folds itself into the quiet of their own meal without disturbing it. It is in this quiet that Pitta feels the first movement. She does not say anything at first. She sets down the piece of bread she is holding and lays her hand, under the edge of the table, on the low slope of her belly. She has suspected for 2 weeks. She has not told her husband because she has lost 2 before this, and she has learned not to give a thing a name until the thing has named itself. She has poured the libation at the floor pipe for her mother, for her mother's mother, and she has said nothing at all to anyone living. Now, under her hand, there is a small, definite movement, as of a fish turning in shallow water. She keeps her face still. She looks at her husband. Nikmepa is chewing an olive, pulling the pit from his mouth, setting it in the little clay dish. He looks tired in the way that a man looks tired when he has carried something unspoken through a long day. She thinks, with the clarity of a woman who has been married for many years, that she will not tell him tonight. She will tell him tomorrow or the day after, when the movement has come again, and she is sure. To tell him now, while he is carrying his harbor thought, would be to ask him to hold 2 things, and she does not want to crowd the first. But she keeps her hand where it is. The swallows have gone. The light on the roof opposite has turned from gold to a thin rose. Pitta thinks, without effort, of the figurine in the niche beside the door. The small Asherah with her heavy breasts and her lion and her coiled serpent, the figure her own mother gave her on the day of her marriage. She has poured oil over that figure many times. She has whispered to it in the dark. She has carried it through 2 losses and kept whispering. She thinks of it now without looking at it. She thinks of it as one thinks of a woman in the next room whose presence one trusts without needing to verify. Nikmepa is speaking. He is saying something about the southern road, about a man he met who had walked up from Gubla with a load of timber and had complained of the state of the bridges. Pita listens. She nods in the right places. The movement under her hand has gone still again, as these movements do, retreating back into whatever fold of her body they inhabit between their small announcements. She does not mind. She knows it will come again. She pours her husband a little more wine. She cuts it with more water than he would cut it himself, because she has noticed in the past month that the wine jar is emptying faster than it used to, and because she knows he will not notice, and because a small domestic kindness may be offered in silence. They finish the meal. The olives are gone. There is a little bread left, and Pita wraps it in a cloth for tomorrow's first hour. She gathers the bowls. Nikmepa stands and stretches his back, the stiffness of a man who has walked to the harbor and back in one day, and who did not used to feel the walk. And he goes to the door of the inner room to fetch the lamp. When he comes back with the lamp lit, the courtyard is suddenly a different place. The small yellow flame pushes the walls in closer. The shadows of the olive jar and the low table lengthen and become companions. The sky above the courtyard has gone to that deep blue that is almost purple and is not yet black. Somewhere beyond the walls on the Acropolis, the first beacon has been lit at the top of the Baal Tower, and though they cannot see it from here, they know it is there, as a sailor knows the pole star is behind the cloud. Pita sits again on the bench. Nikmepa sits beside her this time, not across. He does not do this every evening. She notices. She does not comment. She leans her shoulder against his lightly, and he receives the weight without turning to her, and they sit for a long while in the lamplight without speaking. The cooking fire 2 courtyards over has been banked. A dog barks once somewhere down the street and is quiet. Under her hand, which is still resting low on her belly beneath the edge of her outer robe, Pita feels the small fish turn again, briefly, and settle. She will tell him, she thinks, in 3 days. She will tell him in the morning, before he goes to the scales, when the light is new and a man can hear a thing without the weight of the day on him. She will ask her mother's shade to help the child stay. She will, tomorrow, walk a little more slowly than usual to the grinding stone, for now she stays where she is, shoulder against her husband's shoulder, the lamp between them and the night. And in another part of the city, in another small house, another person is preparing to receive a visitor who has come about an animal. The Tayyu's house stood at the edge of the eastern quarter, where the workshops began to thin and a narrow lane turned back upon itself before meeting the wall. It was a small house, of cobblestone rather than ashlar, 2-storied, the doorway low enough that a tall man remembered it only once and thereafter ducked without thinking. The Tayyu's name was Abdi Horan, which meant the servant of Horanu, and he had borne the name since the day his father pressed a clay figurine into his infant hand. He was not young. His hair had gone the soft gray of ash that has sat a long time in a cold hearth, and his hands, when he set them on the table, had the veined look of men who have worked with small things all their lives. The man at his door that evening was a caravan driver called Ba'alu Shamu, who had come up from the lower road with a donkey on a rope. The donkey was small and gray, and stood with one back hoof lifted a little off the ground, its ears laid flat along its neck. Near the fetlock of the lifted hoof, two small dark punctures were visible through the short hair, and the skin around them had begun to swell into a pale, hot ring. Abdi Horan did not speak at first. He crouched and set his palm against the donkey's shoulder and let it stand there. The donkey's flank was trembling in small, continuous waves, like water shaken in a shallow bowl. He moved his hand down the leg without gripping, only resting, letting the animal know where he was. Ba'alu Shamu stood holding the rope and watching, his face closed. "When?" Abdi Horan said. "Before the last bend of the road. There is a place where the grass grows tall beside the stone." He put his foot down and jumped, and I saw it go. It was long and the color of old wood. Abdi Horan nodded once. He went back inside the house and returned with a small clay tablet, a shallow bowl of water, and a cloth. The tablet was old. It had been his father's, and his father's father's before that, and it was written on both sides in the close-packed cuneiform of the incantation tradition. He did not need to read it. The words lived in his mouth. But he liked to hold it while he worked, as a scribe liked to have the stylus in his hand even when he was only thinking. He set the bowl on the threshold stone. He dipped the cloth. He began to speak the incantation quietly, as if to the donkey alone, and the caravan driver, who did not know the words and was not meant to, stood aside and watched. The incantation told a story. It told of 12 gods, and of a bite, and of 11 gods who offered charms that could not hold the venom. It told of the 12th, who was Horanu, and of how Horanu had gone to the Tigris and cast trees into the water until the venom was diluted in the flood and carried away. As he spoke, Abdi Horan washed the small wound with the wet cloth, not scrubbing, only cleansing, and then he took a little dark paste from a jar that stood on the sill and pressed it over the punctures with his thumb. The paste smelled of crushed leaves and of something sharp beneath the leaves, like metal or like smoke. The donkey's ears came forward a fraction. Not much. Enough. Abdi Horan stood. He did not tell the caravan driver the animal would live. He did not tell him it would die. These were not things Atayu promised. What he said instead was that the donkey should be kept quiet for 3 days, that it should be watered often but not fed heavily, and that if the swelling rose past the hock, he should come back in the morning and not wait. He said this in the same quiet voice in which he had spoken the words about Horanu and the Tigris, and the caravan driver took it in the same way, nodding as if receiving both as one thing. The payment was a small measure of barley and a pot of oil set on the bench inside the door. Abdi Horan did not count them. They would be right. In a city where the scribe and the weigher kept watch over the larger commerce, the smaller commerce between Atayu and the men who came to his door moved by a different arithmetic. Kin, neighborhood, years, the memory of whose child had once been eased of a fever in this same room. Ba'alu Shamu led the donkey away slowly down the lane. The animal walked. It was favoring the leg, but it was walking. Abdi Horan watched until they reached the turn and the gray rump disappeared around the corner of the last workshop. Then he closed the door part way and went back to his table, where the small lamp burned and the old tablet lay. He sat for a while without doing anything. This was his practice at the end of such a visit. He did not believe that he had healed the donkey. He believed that Haranu had heard and had cast again the trees into the flood, and that he himself had been only the mouth through which the old words passed into the evening air where the animal could hear them. It was a gentle belief, and it rested lightly on him, and it permitted him to be tired without being proud. Outside his house the street was quiet. Somewhere down it, a woman was calling a child in from a courtyard. Somewhere farther, a door closed. Abdi Horan banked his lamp down to a low blue tongue of flame. And in another small house, in another part of the city, Yakaru was sitting alone at his doorway. He was not thinking of anything. His hands lay loose on his knees. The step was still warm from the day beneath him, and he let himself settle onto it the way an old man settles into a bench he has known for years. The air had shifted. Yakaru noticed it in the hairs along his forearm before he noticed it anywhere else. A faint lifting, as if the skin had been waiting all summer to be touched. He sat on the low step at his doorway and let the evening move past him. The stones of the street held their day heat still, but above them the air had opened. It had not yet become what it would become in a month's time, when the winds turned from the sea and brought the first rains. It was only a promise, but a promise after the long dry was enough to lean into. He thought of the fig tree in the courtyard of his father's house, the one that had stood behind the kitchen wall when he was a boy. He had not thought of it in years. Something in the coolness had reached down and lifted the memory whole. The tree had been old even then, its trunk split into 3 low trunks that leaned outward like the spokes of a wheel, and the children of the household had climbed into that split and sat with their backs against one another, eating the small green figs that were not yet sweet, and pretending the tree was a chariot. His sister had always been the driver. He had always been the archer. The youngest boy, a cousin whose name he had to reach for now, Abdi something, had been the runner, which meant he was allowed to jump down and pretend to be killed and then climb back up again. They had played this for whole afternoons. The tree had given its shade without asking anything. His mother had come out once with a bowl of soaked grain and set it on the bench beneath them and gone back inside without speaking, and he remembered thinking at that moment, with the clarity of a child who does not yet know he is thinking anything, that he was entirely safe. He was old now. He sat on a step in a city that had been hungry for a year and more, and he did not know where that cousin was, or whether the fig tree still stood, or whether the house still stood. The memory had come without grief. It had come the way the cool air had come, as a thing that had been waiting and had only now been let through. The next morning was slow in the way that only certain mornings are slow. Pita ground the barley at the quern with her daughter beside her, and the rasping of stone on stone was the same rasping it had always been, but the light fell differently across the courtyard. It fell longer and at a slightly lower angle, and the shadow of the door frame reached a little further across the swept dirt. The year was turning. Pita did not say this aloud. Her daughter, who was 12, and who had been the one to notice the cool air first when she rose to fetch water, ground with a slower rhythm than usual, and let her mother work the hard grains. They were nearly finished when Nikmepa came in through the outer gate. Nikmepa had been 3 days without work at the harbor. The ship he had been helping to unload had finished, and the next had not yet come. And in the old days he would have gone back up to the city and spent those days drinking watered wine in the shade with his brother-in-law and mending small things that needed mending. Now he came up quietly and sat on the bench by the oven and watched the women grind and did not say much. Pita poured him a cup of the thin beer that was all they had, and he held it in both hands and did not drink it at once. She said, after a while, without looking up from the stone, "You are quiet." He said he was tired. She said that was not quiet, that was tired, and asked him again. He said he had been standing at the end of the harbor mole yesterday evening where the stones ran out into the sea, and he had seen a thing he could not name. Not a sail, not a fire. A kind of emptiness along the horizon where ordinarily there would be the small marks of far-off vessels moving between Alashia and the coast. The sea had been bare. He had stood there a long time, and the bareness had not filled. Pita was quiet at the stone for a long time. Then she said that the sea was sometimes bare, that winds changed, that ships waited out weather the land could not feel. She said these things the way a mother says to a child that the shadow in the corner is only a cloak folded on a chair, and both of them knew she was saying it that way, and Nikmepa accepted it the way a child accepts such a thing when the child has decided to sleep. He drank the beer. He set the cup down. He said the cool air was welcome. She said it was. She said the year was turning. Across the city, in the room above the workshop of a bronze worker whose name has not survived, a young man named Yatnu sat at a small table with an ivory model of a liver in his hands. He was not a diviner. He was an apprentice to one, the nephew of the Baru who lived 3 streets over, and his task for the morning was to copy from the model into clay the names of the 7 zones the old man had shown him yesterday. He was 17. He was not yet good at the work. The ivory was old and the color of weak tea, and the incantations cut into it had been worn smooth in places by the fingers of men who had run their thumbs along those lines for generations before him. Yatnu held it up to the window to catch the morning light, and the shadow of the incisions darkened momentarily, and then he set the ivory down on the cloth he had spread and took up his clay and his stylus and began. He worked slowly. He made a mistake almost at once and smoothed the clay with the heel of his thumb and began again. He was not thinking of anything large. He was thinking of the shape of the sign for the zone called the gate, which was a little like the sign for threshold and a little like the sign for door. And his uncle had told him yesterday that a man who confused these 3 would read a man's liver and tell him to go to market, when in fact he should have stayed home. And the apprentice had laughed, and the uncle had not laughed, and Yatnu had understood that he was not to laugh either. So he drew the sign for the gate carefully, and then the sign for threshold beneath it, and then the sign for door beneath that, and he looked at all 3, and they were distinguishable. He was pleased. He set the stylus down and stretched his back and looked out the small window at the courtyard below, where a cat was sitting on a warm stone cleaning its paw. The cool of the new season had not yet reached this inner room, but it would. He could feel, in some place below thinking, that it would. He went back to his clay and began the 2nd zone. The ivory lay beside him, older than his grandfather's grandfather, patient as it had always been, and the morning deepened around the slow and careful motions of his hands. The rain came in the afternoon, at first so lightly that it seemed only a shift in the air. Then the dust on the rooftops darkened, and the sound began, a soft, irregular tapping on the reed mats above the courtyards, on the stone of the lanes, on the dry leaves of the fig tree in Pitta's garden. It was the first rain of the season, and in Ugarit every first rain was remarked upon. People came to their doorways. Women stepped into courtyards with their palms turned up. Children who had not seen rain within memory stood astonished, and older children explained. In Pitta's courtyard, 4 people had gathered beneath the fig tree without quite planning it. Yakaru had come over with a small jar of oil that his household owed Pitta from a debt so old neither of them remembered its origin. Eshmunyaton, the diviner, had come to return a cup he had borrowed a month ago and had forgotten until the cooler air reminded him of the cooler room where he had set it down. Rapanu, the merchant who rarely walked this lane, had come because he had heard from his doorman that Pitta's fig was bearing late, and he wanted to see for himself a tree that fruited against the season. And Pitta was there because the tree was hers and the courtyard was hers, and she had that morning baked more bread than her household required, as though she had known. So the 4 of them sat on the low bench, and on 2 stools Pitta brought out, and the rain fell through the leaves of the fig, and they spoke of small things. They spoke of the price of oil, which Rapanu said was rising, but would settle. They spoke of a woman in the next lane whose daughter had given birth to twins, both alive, both strong. They spoke of the tax collector's new donkey. Eshmunyaton mentioned that his nephew had drawn the sign for a gate correctly that morning, and the others received this news with the gravity it deserved. Pitta said the fig tree had given 9 fruits this season, which was few, but each had been sweet. Rapanu asked whether he might taste one, and Pitta said there were none left. He had come too late, but she had bread and oil and a little of the wine that Yakaru had brought over yesterday. They ate unhurried. The rain thickened and then thinned and then thickened again. A trickle ran along the edge of the courtyard where the paving dipped, and Pitta watched it find its way to the drain and disappear. Yakaru closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the sound of water on leaves, which he had not heard since spring, and which he had not realized he had missed. Eshmunyaton, who had spent the morning reading a liver for a man whose wife was ill, let the afternoon rest against him without asking anything of it. Rapanu thought briefly of the ship that would sail in 3 weeks, and then set the thought aside. The ship would sail or it would not. The rain would fall today whether he thought of the ship or not. No one spoke of the letters. No one spoke of the ships that had been seen off Cyprus, or of the grain that had not come, or of the troops in Hatti who had not returned. These things were known. These things were present at the edge of every quiet afternoon in the city that autumn, but they did not need to be spoken of now under the fig tree, while the rain fell on leaves that had been dry for many months and were drinking. Pitta refilled the cups. The bread was finished. The light began very slowly to go. Evening came gently. The rain eased and then stopped, and the air smelled of wet stone and wet dust, and faintly of something green. Rapanu took his leave first because he had a household to return to. Eshmunyaton lingered a while longer, and then walked home with the borrowed cup returned, and his hands empty, and his mind quiet. Yakaru stayed the longest, and he and Pita sat without speaking while the courtyard darkened around them. Then he too rose and touched her shoulder, and went out through her gate into the lane. The streets at evening were very quiet. Lamps were being lit behind shuttered windows. Somewhere a woman was calling a child in from a rooftop. Somewhere a dog, satisfied, was settling onto a warm stone. Yakaru walked slowly down his familiar lane, past the doorway where he had passed the weir this morning, and the potter's shop where a new bowl sat drying, and he came to his own gate and went inside. And now, as he closes his door, and as Pitta banks her fire, and as Eshmun-Yatan washes his face in a basin of cool water, and as Rapanu sits with his wife on their upper terrace and watches the last light leave the sea, now too you may let the city go. Let the streets grow dark around you. Let the lamps in the windows dim one by one. Let the fig tree stand in its courtyard with rain still beaded on its leaves. Let Yatnu sleep in his small room with the ivory model on the cloth beside his pillow, and his stylus laid down, and his clay covered with a damp rag against the morning. Let Nikmepa sleep in the harbor town, with the sound of the sea coming through his window. Let the weir sleep beside his wife, and the chariot noble beside his, and the soldier who is not here sleep wherever he is tonight, under whatever stars. The city breathes, and the rain has stopped, and the air is cool, and the dead beneath the floors are quiet, and the gods in their temples are quiet, and the ships on the water are at anchor, and the road to the harbor is empty, and there is nothing now that you are required to hold. Let it all rest.